Today is the finale. It's the end of this series, Doing My Part. And so if maybe you haven't been, each week of this series, maybe you missed, one Sunday or you missed, the whole series, I want to just recap a little bit on what we've been exploring together. This idea that we all have a part to play in this larger story of the evolution of consciousness, of the growth of love and compassion in our world, that we feel as though we are on this journey as human beings, as humanity, and that we all have some part to play, large or small. That was what we explored on the first week, that we all have a part to play, right? And maybe sometimes these are parts to play that have more fanfare or more visibility, and maybe sometimes our part seems insignificant and it goes unseen, but we all bring something to the table that benefits the collective. The second week, we spoke about how this part, getting more specific into your part, we called it your medicine, your dharma, that what you bring, your gift to the world, is not just the things that you're good at. It's not just the things that you might like to do, but it is also informed by the challenges that you face, that which you've overcome, your pain. It's all part of it. All of you, all of who you are belongs and contributes to this gift that you bring into the world. So we welcome all of it because perhaps you have a special form of empathy and compassion and a way that your heart is opened, not in spite of, but because of what you have been through and overcome. Then last week, we spoke about this profound yet subtle shift toward holding space, recognizing that while our inclination as human beings is so often to want to fix and solve things for other people, that perhaps the most powerful thing we can do for ourselves, for each other, for our communities, and maybe for the world, for humanity, is to hold space, is to hold a loving, unconditional space for others as they go through whatever journey they are being called to. So perhaps presence is one of the greatest gifts that we can offer. And something that we've been saying week to week is that when you do your part, you are doing it on behalf of something much larger than yourself. You are doing it on behalf of the collective, on behalf of humanity. But maybe it's not just that we are doing our part on behalf of those who are alive today, but maybe there is also a connection and a relationship to those who came before us and those who will follow us. That we are, in fact, participating in a work that is so much larger than our lives and even maybe the time and space that we currently occupy. See, today we're going to be talking a bit about our ancestors. And that word comes from a Latin root, which in its most simple form means those who came before. So it hasn't always necessarily meant blood relatives or your family lineage. That in a more simple, direct way, it simply means those who have walked the path before you, those from whom we are inheriting the world. So we are going to talk a bit about family today, but if that's not something you feel like exploring today, if you're like, I don't want to think about my family line, then just simply, as we talk about ancestors, you can simply think about those who have walked the path before you. But we understand that in the modern day, and maybe particularly in the West, we sometimes have this lack of connection with our ancestors. Right? We maybe as we are often to do in our modern day, we have turned even something like ancestry into a commodity, something like an app, right? Like literally there is ancestry.com. So we have taken this thing that has all this potential, and we've turned it into something that costs money, which I think is so interesting. And I'll be honest, like there was a time for me where I was like, I'm curious about Ancestry.com. A friend of mine told me, it was like, it's really great. And I was like, well, how much money does it cost? And he was like, well, free trial, and how many of us, the power and the allure of the free trial, right? It's a big part of our, and so I did this free trial for Ancestry.com, 2 weeks, and I was like, okay, let's see what I can accomplish in 2 weeks. And I ended up tracing all this family history that I didn't even know I had, geographies that I didn't know were in place. And one side of my family, I was able to follow all the way back to the 1700s. It was remarkable. And then my 2 weeks were up, and I was like, well, I guess that's it for, connecting with my ancestors. How much does it cost? $20? Well, it's like, yeah, but then HBO Max has all this good stuff coming out, so it's like, I don't know, But it's a silly dilemma, but unfortunately, that kind of shows you how much we've reduced our connection to our ancestry. Meanwhile, when it comes to Eastern cultures and traditions and spiritual backgrounds, when it comes to African cultures and traditions, when it comes to indigenous cultures and traditions, including Western indigenous cultures, we see that there is much greater of a connection to the ancestors, and an understanding that the ancestors are not something distant and abstract, but something here and now, right? We might think about things like ancestral veneration, which is something that occurs in different spiritual traditions where there are spiritual practices and ceremonies and offerings that revolve around bringing the ancestors close, connecting with, right? Sending love and honor to, right? And so whether we recognize this connection, whether we prioritize it, we do have this sense that it is something that all beings have in common, that all beings come from those who walked the path before us, that all beings have inherited the world from someone else, and that there is a connection there, whether or not we choose to recognize it. But let's do that. Let's recognize it today somewhat. Let's recognize the fact that if you are alive today, that you are the result of an unbroken chain of human beings that goes back since the beginning of human life and further back than that to the beginning of life itself. But if we just focused on human life, there are estimates that would say that in your lineage and in my lineage, that there are 12,000 generations of human beings. It's a massive number, and it's just nearly incomprehensible to think about. But to give some context, the United States yesterday celebrated its 250th birthday. That's roughly 10 generations. And we're talking about 12,000. Just the vast array of human beings that is part of your lineage, right? The amount of generations. And think about the differences and the changes that have occurred among these generations. Sometimes we get caught up in little differences between generations in the modern day, right? Like sometimes 1 or 2 generations, we might really get hyper-focused on how different a few generations are. Like the boomers and the millennials sometimes have some differences, Like the boomers will often say to the millennials, if you didn't spend so much money on extravagant lattes, you might have been able to own a home by now. And the millennials look back at the boomers and we're like, well, it might have been nice buying a home when they cost $50 in a pack of gum. I have younger brothers who are Gen Z, and they speak a language that I barely understand. It's interesting, though, we think about 12,000 generations, right, and how vast of the different experiences that was. And think about the miracle it is of you, that at no point in those 12,000 generations was there a break in that chain. So you're the result of all kinds of love. You are the result of unimaginable resilience. If you can imagine any possible challenge that a human being could go through, it's all but certain that that happens somewhere in your ancestry. And if you can imagine any possible miracle that could sustain life, that also happened in your ancestry. The days that we might feel discouraged, the days that we might feel like we don't matter, we don't know what our place is in the world, maybe just remember those 12,000 generations that led to you. It's a humbling and beautiful recognition that we hold some of those genetics and those stories and maybe even those behaviors that are alive in you. They are not just distant. That's not just a concept. But there is another side to this. And I think it's one worth exploring when we talk about doing our part. Yes, we are the accumulation of love. We are the accumulation of tradition. We are the accumulation of genetics. But we also hold within us trauma that is passed down, cycles that went unbroken, ways in which our ancestors were quite stuck, right? And in many ways, that lives within us. So we think about history for a moment. We think about what they may have lived through. We recognize that human history is full of violence and hierarchy, oppression, systemic abuse. So the things that might have been passed down to them and passed down to us maybe were not intentional, but they were victims to things happening in the world. Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart is a therapist, a trauma worker for the Lakota people, and she puts it this way: historical trauma is cumulative emotional and psychological wounding over the lifespan and across generations, emanating from massive group trauma experiences. Things like war, genocide, pandemic, depressions. These are all things that have happened in our world multiple times in just the last century. So we recognize that we all are the results. We all have some of these experiences that live within us. I was just reflecting recently on my own family history. I have one side a grandmother who was an infant in the Philippines during the World War II, bombs going off all around her, occupation by enemy forces. I have another side of my family who, great-grandparents, if they had not migrated from Eastern Europe when they did, they may have been, victims of the Holocaust. And I just recognized that, wow, something like World War II, which feels kind of distant and abstract, it actually is alive in me. It's in my bones somehow. We all have some version of this, ripples and echoes of the past that are felt in our lives, whether we recognize it or not. Maybe you had a caretaker who wasn't emotionally available and caring for you in the way that you would have liked them to be, but maybe you can look back and you can recognize, well, wow, they were either a part of a war or they lived in a world under threat of war, and you can see how they were also victims of circumstance. Maybe you grew up in a family with financial fear and anxiety, and yet you recognize that your parents, their parents, and far enough back lived through something like the Great Depression and how that must have affected their own sense of security and stability in the world. So we attempt some empathy and compassion for those who came before and the things they were subject to, the things that they may not have chosen, so that when we recognize what was passed down, we recognize that it very well may not have been intentional. It may have been the result of what went unhealed in a given lifetime. Richard Rohr says that if we do not transform our pain, we will most assuredly transmit it. This is so important. I've underlined this one many times. It's a reminder. It's so powerful in a large-scale way in terms of generations and families and human lives. But it also is, I think, is true in the small scale, right? Just when we think about sometimes our own latent emotions. Like, have any of us ever just taken out some frustration on something or someone that did not deserve it? I recently took out some frustration just this past couple of weeks. I recently took out some frustration on a hat. Like I was a little frustrated, and I crumpled it, and poor hat did nothing to me. The hat had nothing to do with anything. The hat didn't cause any of the frustration, but yet it had to be, But sometimes that's what happens in life. There are things like rage rooms where people can pay money to go and take out their anger and frustration on physical objects. Like I don't know if you've heard of this, but you can put on this gear and you get a sledgehammer and you can destroy things like cars and TVs, and you pay money to do this, So it just tells you that we have this going on in our world. We have emotions that live under the surface. And maybe these emotions accrue over a lifetime, right? And maybe they come from the lives that came before us. Maybe we witnessed emotions that went unexpressed or were expressed in unhealthy ways. And what couldn't be released in someone's lifetime ended up being reenacted in yours. So when we think about doing our part and the healing that comes with doing our part, we're recognizing that really what we're saying is, I'm not going to pass the buck. I'm going to take what was maybe given to me unfairly, and I'm going to heal it because I can. Right? You didn't ask for it. Right? None of us asked to be born into a world of and a life and an upbringing that was going to bring us pain. But it's an incredible opportunity. This is why we use words like generational healing that happens across generations. We use words like cycle breaker, that there may have been cycles in your lineage that have happened over and over and over again, and you're saying, I'm going to be the one to break it. Whatever I was past, I'm not going to keep passing it. We said when we started this series, doing my part, that it was kind of a sequel series to the previous month where we talked about doing the work. See, when we do the work, when we heal, when we grow, when we look inside and see the things that we need to work on, it affects so much more than just ourselves. Therapist and author Terry Real speaks about this. He says, family dysfunction rolls down from generation to generation like a fire in the woods, taking down everything in its path until one person in one generation has the courage to turn and face the flames. That person brings peace to their ancestors and spares the children that follow. Friends, you are here today. So many of you are doing that work. So many of you are that person. Do you want to be that person to bring peace to your ancestors and spare the children that follow? See, if we transform, when we transform, we do it on behalf of those who came before us. Just imagine for a moment, and even if this is more just of a way of using your imagination, and it's just a picture that you create in your mind, just imagine that your ancestors, that those who maybe couldn't heal in their lifetime, that as you engage in that healing work, that they are cheering you on, right? That they're grateful for that. Now, it's not just those who came before, but it's also those who come after. Because we, all of us, you and I, we are this incredible meeting point of the past and the future. The past lives in us, certainly. But you and I are also future ancestors, right? Whether or not you have children, that we are all ones who came before. We are all ones who are leaving a world for others to inherit. So in that sense, we are all future ancestors, which means that your life, my life, is this incredible opportunity for change, for growth, for transformation that affects so much more than we can realize that we can see. What if we could just open our minds and live as though everything we did affected so much more than we actually could see? Well, this is actually indigenous wisdom. It's wisdom that comes from the Haudenosaunee people, who we may also know as the Iroquois, but that was their European given name, but their ancestral name is the Haudenosaunee people. And this is a people group who is in fact a six-nation democracy, that in fact it's one of the oldest functioning democratic collectives in the world, and deeply influenced the United States in its formation, though this has not always been recognized until more recently. But Benjamin Franklin was actually at Haudenosaunee gatherings and council meetings where he saw the vision for, you could actually have different states, so to speak, gather and unite under a sort of constitutional framework. And in 1988, the United States actually formally recognized in Congress the influence and impact of the Haudenosaunee people on the formation of this American experiment. But the reason I share this today is because the Haudenosaunee people, their sort of constitutional framework is this incredible sort of guideline law, constitution, called the Great Law of Peace, which is this unbelievably profound and powerful way of organizing that deeply prioritized connection with nature, reciprocity with the land and with animals, valued women leadership, prioritized peace and harmony and service to the world. Perhaps one of the most well-known aspects of the Great Law of Peace that comes from the Haudenosaunee people is the 7 generations principle. Now, it is this idea that our actions, our behaviors, our ways of moving and being in the world as individuals and as a collective, that we ought to think about how we affect those 7 generations to come, to broaden our understanding of our impact in the world that we're leaving behind, the world that others will one day inherit. Just as we inherit so much from those who have come before, would we recognize what we are passing down? This is the 7 generations principle. Oren Lyons is a tradition keeper for the Haudenosaunee people who is alive today, and he says it like this: we're looking ahead to make every decision that we make relate to the welfare and well-being of the 7th generation to come. Could you take that responsibility to make every decision that we make relate to the welfare and well-being of the 7th generation to come? Now, look, I'll be honest, sometimes it can feel, I look at this and I feel a little intimidated and overwhelmed by the prospect of making every decision relate to the welfare and well-being of 7 generations. Like, I make some really mundane, unimportant decisions in my life. Like next time you're at El Charro and they're asking, what would you like to order? And you say, well, I think I want the chimichanga. And they say, well, do you want an enchilada style? And you say, yes, of course. And then they say, would you like that with red or green sauce? And you're like, okay, it's quite a decision. Can I do both? And they say, of course you can. That might not be a decision that affects 7 generations to come. I don't know. It might. But when we take this 7 generations principle as a larger framework for how we approach life, how we move through the world, it reminds us that we are all figures in someone else's life. We're all parents. We're all aunts and uncles. We're all parental figures. We're all mentors. We're all grandparents. We're all great-grandparents on some level. And we may have limited interactions with the people, generations to follow, but we recognize we do live in them on some level. And so this idea of doing my part, might we actually think about it in that broad of a scope, doing my part for 7 generations to come? What will you heal in your lifetime? What will you transcend in your lifetime? What will you transform in your lifetime, knowing that creates the world that someone else inherits? Wendell Berry was a poet, an ecologist, a theologian who kind of gave us this sort of expanded golden rule that brings in this generational component. He said, do unto those downstream as you would have those upstream do unto you. May we leave behind a world that we wish we would have inherited. See, humanity is in this process. It's a massive process of unbelievable scale, of unfolding, of becoming. A couple series back, we talked about the good, the true, and the beautiful. We recognize that perhaps the universe is in this process of bringing out more goodness and more truth and more beauty into the world. That we as human beings have the opportunity to bring more love into the world, to recognize our true nature. And so perhaps doing my part is woven into the fabric of a great work, of the work that is unfolding in the cosmos, on this planet, in humanity, and in your own life. Sometimes I think of it like a relay race. This unimaginably vast relay race, but a relay race nonetheless, where if we are alive today, we have been handed the baton. And now the way that you were handed the baton might not have been fair right? It might not have been easy. Maybe you were handed the baton and at the same time you were tripped, right? And you were given things in your childhood, you were inherited things that made it difficult for you. You had so much to overcome. But you do have the baton now, and it's your opportunity to do with it what you choose, to make the world that you want to leave behind. And I really want to invite you today just to recognize the ways in which you already have been doing that, the ways in which you've already been transforming what you might have been given. We sometimes call this alchemy, this transformational process where, yes, I might have been handed these challenges. I might have had so much to overcome, and yet in my life, I have taken this opportunity to bring more love, to turn something incredibly difficult and turn it into a value and something that I can bring more goodness into the world. And I invite you to think about continually transforming and growing and participating in this great work, because I believe that as long as we have breath in our lungs, that we can continue evolving and transforming and healing. And so I want to just take a moment for us to reflect on this. I want to invite you, if you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes, rest your gaze, take some deep breaths, get comfortable. And in this moment, what we're going to be doing is maybe a little more imaginative than what we usually do. And so if this is a bit more visualization than you feel like you want to do this morning, that's totally fine. You can just take a moment and take some peace and stillness. But if you'd like, you can visualize with me, and you could see yourself and see that you as a human being, you are this meeting point of the past and the future. Not just your family, your blood relatives, but all of those who came before, who have had an influence on your life. And certainly those who we may have directly interacted with in our life are clearer, our parents, our grandparents. But we also recognize that there were the many who come before them. And there's also the many who will come after us, our children or those who are the next generation in our lives, right? And 7 generations beyond them. And we see ourselves as this great chain of being, that we are the universe in action. We are love in motion, and we are participating in this continual process of healing, growing, and transforming. And so take a moment and look back at those who have come before, who may have faced great pain and great challenge. And maybe they could not fully heal some things in their lifetime, but you might be able to. You might be able to take up that work. And imagine that as you do, as you make that choice, that they are grateful. And in this same moment, that as you're looking back, you might find some gratitude for them, for those who came before, if for nothing else than for the fact that they have given you life. We find some empathy for the ways that they might have suffered. And we invite more love and more wholeness as we think about them and whatever it is that they're experiencing. And we also look ahead. We look ahead to the 7 generations to come. And we recognize that how we live now does in some way live in them. We recognize the enormous opportunity in every single moment. And maybe just take a few breaths to really ask yourself, what do I want to leave for the next generation? What kind of world would I like for them to inherit? What kind of values would I like for them to inherit? What can I heal so they don't have to? And with our last few breaths, we extend gratitude in all directions. We extend gratitude behind us for those who came before, gratitude in front of us for those who will come after, and gratitude all around us for those in this room today who have shared this experience and this time with us. We send gratitude in all directions and love in all directions.